EdTech Currents, Episode 5, a conversation with author Ron Oliver and a DET student, Leitha delves about authentic e-learning. Bright and early here in the United States, but my guests are joining us from Australia. And so, Ron and Leitha, I will let you take a moment to introduce yourselves.
Okay, Leitha, do you want to introduce yourself? Because you are the reason why I'm here.
Okay, so I am Leitha Delves, and I'm currently wearing two hats, one of which is that I am a student in the doctoral program at CNU in EdTech. I'm also a senior learning designer at Edith Cowan University in Perth, and my bread and butter is the design of learning experiences, primarily using educational technology. So that's me in a nutshell.
Okay, well, my name's Ron Oliver, and I was previously Deputy Vice-Chancellor Teaching and Learning at Edith Cowan University. And I've known Leitha for many years because Leitha worked in the Teaching and Learning Centre, which was one of the areas under my management. And so Leitha and I chatted many times about e-learning and learning design, and Leitha was one of our strong learning designers in the centre. So when Leitha told me that she was doing a doctorate in this area, I was very happy to encourage her. And so I guess that's why we find ourselves here today, because Leitha is in that program now, and you Troy have sort of invited me along to say a few things about one of my pet interests in this space, which is authentic learning.
Absolutely. And I'm always just amazed at the serendipity that happens with online learning, because I read your book a few years ago. We've used it in a faculty learning community at CMU, and then I integrated it into my course for this semester. And no sooner had I posted the syllabus than Leitha emailed me and said, "Oh, we should get Ron online and talk to him." So it's just amazing how the world works and the power of e-learning to make these connections. So I'm really, oh, go ahead.
Especially too, as it was about 2 weeks after we had just had a visit from Tom Reeves, which he came and talked to us, didn't he, Ron, about his work at the World Health Organization, but in relation to authentic e-learning. So it was all, yes, very serendipitous.
Yeah, great. So I really want to do a lot of listening and learning from the two of you, since you've had a long relationship and been thinking about this for a while. And as I was saying right before we got on the air here, really I'm interested in trying to help students, especially at the master's and doctoral level, reconceptualize what e-learning is and what it could be. I think that one of the challenges we face here in the States, both at the K-12 level and the higher ed level, is that many teachers are presented with prepackaged curriculum. They may have a little bit of freedom to change some things or adapt assignments in slightly different ways, but they're generally not developing their own courses from the ground up. And even if they are, they're feeling highly constrained and having to align with certain types of quizzes and tests and assessments of those manner. So I know that you have both thought about this, and Ron, we're using your e-learning, authentic e-learning book as one of our cornerstone texts this semester for our blended and online learning class. And so I thought the flow of the conversation would just be, tell us how we got here, where are we at right now, and where are we going in the future? How can we really encourage teachers and university faculty to use e-learning in meaningful, authentic, creative, critical, engaging ways, and not just be beholden to the curriculum and the assessments that they're given? And with that, like I said, I'm going to do a lot of listening and maybe poke in with a few questions here, but I'm curious to hear what the both of you have to say about these topics.
Okay, well, Troy, I might start. I guess my interest in e-learning started a long time ago when I did my PhD. I used to teach kids to learn to program, and I was very interested in the models of learning that we were using at the time. And I discovered that we used to do a lot of the instructional methodology was encouraged shallow learning. So in other words, kids learned to code by copying code and by using examples that other people had written and just changing bits and pieces. So in my thesis, I went through what I developed a model which I called the contextual model of learning, which tried to ground programming within meaningful context. So I tried to move away from sort of tasks which were very textbook oriented to tasks which the students could have an understanding of what they were trying to do. And so I tried to develop in my model a way of developing students' algorithmic reasoning. And to do that, I came up with lots of real life examples, which I then used as the basis for the programming tasks that I was setting the students. And so they were learning to program by thinking about things that they were doing. Anyway, where that all led was that I was able to prove that when students learned in this contextual fashion, they did in fact become better at algorithmic thinking, and they could pass tests relating to algorithmic thinking far better than more conventional methods, which were really just the old coding methods. Interestingly, although in the areas where I did my study, I was able to show quite significant improvements in student learning, there was quite a bit of hard work on the part of teachers to use this method. And it was quite hard for the students who had to think and they had to use their brains. And so there wasn't a lot of take-up of it. And that left me reflecting along the lines of, well, I've managed to show that I can help the students learn better, but no one's really that worried in this. They're very happy to just continue with the old methods. And I remember I was an examiner in Western Australia of students computing, and a lot of the teachers really only wanted us to examine at the surface level. There wasn't really a need for anything deeper. So I sort of moved away from that thinking, yeah, well, that was an interesting exercise, but it didn't go anywhere. Then in the early 90s, I met Tom Reeves, and I'm not too sure, Troy, if you know Tom, but Leitha does. And he is a fantastic instructional designer, and he really, really got my mind thinking about what is the way we should help students learn. And Tom was sort of like a mentor to me. So I got to know Tom pretty well, and I got involved in the Ed Media organisation, and I went to conferences and I started to, wrap my head around what people were doing in this space. And one of my colleagues at work, Jan Harrington, was an instructional designer who at that time wanted to do a PhD. So she decided that what she wanted to do was this area of authentic learning. And so I think all of our ducks lined up. So Jan really was the person that sort of conceptualized authentic learning, and myself and Tom, with our previous interests in the space, were very, very happy to be part of the work that she did. And so over the period of time, that's where the term authentic learning that we were using came from, and it came principally from work that Jan was doing that was in some respects initially supervised by myself, and then with Tom as we developed our working relationship broader and broader. So basically what that meant was that with Jan's thesis, which was the start of the whole thing, we conceptualized through Jan's work this notion of what it was to design work using an authentic context. Way back in those days, everybody used the ADDIE model as the generic model for instructional design. And I imagine many of you are familiar with that. And Troy, you'd probably know this quite well. It's sort of developed by Dick and Kerry Orch. It's from that period. But the idea of instructional design was that you would analyse what the learning needs were. You would then design the learning environment. You'd develop the materials, implement them, and evaluate them. But fascinatingly, the D that stands for design, there was very little to help people to know what to do. And so whilst I was trying to help people learn, help people to design instructions, there wasn't a lot of guidance or theory about what you actually did when you were designing. You sort of knew the steps in the process. When it got to design, you're left to your own devices. And that's where the authentic learning model became quite prominent. So it sort of brought together what we thought were some really nice elements that would guide people who wanted to create learning opportunities for students that would lead to a deep understanding. And it was all about the important person in the learning setting being the student, not the teacher. And it was all about teachers, as facilitators of learning, as guides, rather than the actual person who taught, in inverted commas. So we did lots and lots of work in that space. And after Jan had published her thesis and she won some incredible prizes for the work that she did, I had the opportunity to apply the work in lots and lots of projects that we did across Australia to sort of really iron out what we meant and how it could be used. And that sort of became a big part of the research that we were doing at the particular time. So the thing about authentic learning is what it does is it describes the way in which teachers who want students to develop a capability, it helps teachers to design learning experiences that will bring about the capability. And what's fundamental to it is that students learn by doing. And the product, that they develop a product. So it's not about reading a book, it's not about answering questions, it's about being able to demonstrate the capability in the development of some type of artifact. And the artifact becomes the assessment item. So in other words, you build something and you are judged on your capabilities and your development of your skill by the product that you've been able to build when you finish. So it really has quite a good sound basis in terms of practical and theoretical elements. I guess that's probably a good point to ponder. And see, Troy, if you wanted to ask me to elaborate on anything, or Leitha, you wanted to add anything there?
I think what I would add is, how I guess became most swallowed up in the idea of authentic e-learning. Is also related to Jan Harrington in that one of Jan's master's students, Jenny Parker, doing her master's project, no doubt it was an authentic project. In fact, it was an authentic project. She was developing a professional development program for designers of instruction, which she called Authentic E-Design. And myself and the other learning designers here at ECU at the time, and other people from other West Australian universities, were sort of her test cases in a way. We did the course. Jenny facilitated the course, and it was probably not far off the time when your book, The Guide to Authentic E-Learning, came out, and many of us in the office had been given a copy, thanks to you and Sue Stoney, and we had that theory and we had the book and we had the understanding, but it wasn't translating very much to our actual work as learning designers. And yet through doing the professional development course that Jenny developed, that was learning by doing, because we were doing her course, but we were doing that process. We were creating a product. We were designing, I can't remember if it was the whole course or if we were designing a learning task. And we sort of, got that hands-on experience that made the concept stick, because we were having a go at them. And for me, it made the penny drop between the idea of producing that artifact that was an authentic product of our field, but also the stages along the way that allowed us to, I guess, build on those 21st century skills around sharing our knowledge, articulating our knowledge. The stages of the process of creating this product were sort of signposted or had milestones associated with them, in which we blogged or we engaged in a peer discussion or something that sort of made us pause and articulate what we learned. And that process really cemented the two parts of authentic e-learning for me, not just the end product of some relevant product or artifact, but the the skills along the way, the technology skills, the online learning skills, the digital literacy skills, whatever you want to call them, that to the learner can seem less authentic to what they're doing. And what I mean about that is, if I'm working with an academic in marketing and they see that there's great wisdom in having their students produce a strategic marketing plan over the semester, often balk at, say, parts of it that are about using a wiki or doing some technology-related learning activity that may seem less authentic to their field. But doing that e-design course made me see, and helped me to make them see, that it is authentic to the building of those soft skills, those 21st century literacy skills, that where the authenticity lies. And so that was a big useful moment for me, was engaging in the process myself. And I often wish that with every academic I work with, I could get them to be an online learner first before we start redesigning their course, so that they also might have those pennies drop for them.
Yeah, that's great, Leitha. Yeah. So the authentic learning that is described in Jan's thesis was the notion that if you want somebody to be able to do something, you have to, in the first instance, work out what it is that you want them to be able to do. And then you then have to create a learning setting that gives them the opportunity to develop the skills. So you start with an open-ended task for which there can be a multitude of different solutions. So the student needs to choose what will be the path and what will be the tasks that they will do. And then the teacher's job is to provide access to the information that they need. So the student has to sort of like seek out the learning opportunities. So the really nice thing about authentic learning is when students are reading, they're reading for a purpose. So previously, if a student was doing an online course and there are readings involved, the instruction normally says, read the following and answer these questions. In an authentic environment, the student has chosen a task, chosen something they want to do, so they have to go to the readings to find out information that will help them. So they always read with purpose, and that to me is absolutely critical. So they build something, or they go about the learning process. Now, it's not unguided. The teachers can be available and the teachers can be there to assist the students, and the students can work collaboratively and work off each other. The idea is that the process of learning is all about engaging in relevant information, being able to practice individual bits that become the sum of the parts. What I really like about authentic learning is that people appreciate the fact that when you are in an authentic learning setting, you're doing something that's going to be useful. You have to produce a product that has use outside the classroom. So there's a myriad of examples out there of people who use authentic learning, and the students generate materials, they generate resources, they generate products that are useful for everybody. So we had our students, you know, in different product programs, building business cases for industry. We had our students in their multimedia programs building websites. So the work that the students do become real pieces of work that can be useful for other people, and it provides a very, very nice context for learning. So when you are trying to help people design learning settings, that type of context is really, really powerful, because every teacher you talk to thinks, hey, this is great. This is what this is how I want to teach. This is getting away from the boring, the dull, the teacher-centered stuff. This is where the students actually need to develop this interest themselves. And so it's a really nice environment to actually work later with when you actually are in those settings. So I guess, Troy, one of the questions you started, well, one of the premises you started with is that, where are we currently with e-learning? Do we see much of this stuff around? And I guess my answer to that is, I don't think we see enough of it. There's so many people out there at the moment who see themselves as teachers, and the role of a teacher is to present. And so if you see your role as a presenter, then you're not probably going to be helping that much learning, because the best way for students to learn is to do, and the best way for students to learn is for the teacher to be the lesser important individual in the environment, for the student to be in charge. So whilst teachers see their role as teaching, the authentic learning perhaps is not going to be as prominent as it might be. What we need to be able to do is to develop people who are learning designers. And so it's a different type of teacher. It's someone who can create the learning setting and then step away and leave that learning setting for others to implement. And so that's, as Leitha was saying, that was part of the strategy in the development of our learning designers that I think has been very effective. So I look now at lots and lots of online learning settings to try and get a sense of, where the future is, where we are currently. And we don't seem to have moved very far. I've been using technology for learning now since probably about 1980, so way back. And through the 80s, we developed computer-based assisted instruction, and in the early 90s, we had CD-ROMs, and we developed quite interactive elements. And then the web came along, and all we did was tend to put content online. And in the last 5 or 6 years, I've noticed that we've had this phenomenon called MOOCs, which have raised their head, and people have discovered a new form of e-learning, but it's really all the old stuff rehashed. It's just the same sort of material repackaged and repurposed for different sort of settings. And I'd say that my sense is that the bulk of what we see as e-learning now is really electronic books. Really, really nice books, but that's all they are. And the thing about an authentic learning design is it's a very engaging, it's a very interactive activity, and it uses electronic books as part of its development process. But the authentic learning is all about being able to demonstrate your capability rather than develop it, I guess, which is what the books will help you to do. So my sense is that, when I look at some really, really nice MOOCs, they have quite interactive elements. But they're fundamentally based on chapters that you read or you attend to. They're based on activities that you do to see whether you understood what you were reading, and you progress from one section to the next in a very sort of like a progressive fashion, and someone determines what order you'll learn in, and when you've finished the last chapter and demonstrate that you've understood it, you're deemed to have passed. And so that's really a form of what we did 25 years ago, which is pretty flat, pretty uninteresting, and pretty ineffective if it actually is intended to actually bring about residual change. In other words, if the person who's doing the learning is going to walk away a changed person because they can now do something quite different to when they started. So I'm a little bit disappointed that we haven't really had the impact that we needed to have. But as you said, Troy, it's because a lot of people who are teaching are using materials that others have designed, and there's so much material out there that is in the main text-based or information-based, with the view that learners learn if they can access this information, and you put a full stop after that. Again, I'd be happy to, if there's any comments that either of you'd like to make to clarify or elaborate.
Yeah, if I can interject for a moment, I'm taking tons of notes here. So the interesting couple things that I think have come out is this idea that you're producing something for a purpose. I've heard that from both of you. You're reading for a purpose, you're discovering information for a purpose, you're collaborating for a purpose. And then, as you were just saying there at the end, Ron, like we really haven't come that far, except now that we have these really, really nice digital books. And so I'm wondering, as you look at the current state, and I certainly want to talk about the future in a moment, but as we look at the current state, are there things that people are doing that we could just help them pivot and do a little bit different, or do we really need this wholesale throw the baby out with the bathwater, we have to start all over again? Are there possibilities with some of the things that we see, or as when we get to this future conversation in a moment, are we really going to have to reimagine everything from semesters and courses and textbooks and chapters? Or can we hold on to some of this and just try to do it in a different way? Do you have thoughts about that, or have you explored those ideas?
I do have a thought on that. I think we're close. I think we're close because part of the contemporary lexicon now is this notion of learning outcomes, course learning outcomes. In Australia now, and I guess in the States it's the same, we're looking at university degrees not as collections of units, courses, which is what they were traditionally, collections of courses. They're now collections of capabilities. In other words, when someone designs a degree, they say, when you have finished this degree, you will be able to do this, do this, do this, and do this. And they're stated and they're quite articulate. So if that is the case, then as we go back into the courses, whose principal purpose is to develop these capabilities, within them, we should be seeing people whose learning environments are assessed by assessment of the capability. And wherever you see someone's assessment assessing what students can do, then you've got the prospect, then you've got the opportunity to have authentic learning. So if you're in an English literature program and at the end of this particular course, the students will be able to develop a piece of poetry, or if you're in a filmmaking course and at the end of the course, students will be able to produce a film. If you're in a mathematics course and at the end of the course, students will be able to, design and build such and such. Well, that's probably more an engineering course, but these things all point to capabilities rather than knowledge bases. When people write their learning objectives, they have words like will be able to understand, we'll be able to demonstrate, but we won't be able to demonstrate. We want the verbs in our learning outcomes to be verbs which require people to be able to sit down and actually demonstrate that they can do what we're assessing. And the perfect way to implement authentic learning is for those assessments to have authentic tasks set behind them. So that, I think there's a lot of hope because that's the way the world's moving in terms of its, the direction of its educational programs.
Can I just add to that, Ron, you'll be very pleased to hear that the momentum that was picking up before you left ECU is growing enormously in terms of course level outcomes, or for US listeners, I guess that'll be program level outcomes. Under the new Pro-Vice Chancellor of Education, we're really sweeping through, each learning designer is sweeping through their entire school that they're assigned to. So for me, that's Academy of Performing Arts. And every program is having its program level outcomes looked at, and they're being asked the question, what is it that the graduate of this program will have the capability of doing? And some are light bulbs are going off and some are being dragged kicking and screaming, but our new Pro-Vice Chancellor has got a personal vendetta, thankfully, against verbs like understand and demonstrate. And so literally at a sort of, I guess, a micro level, with each program that we work with, we see those statements and they say demonstrate an understanding of X, Y, and Z in the creation or for the creation of blah, blah, blah. We say, will they be creating a blah, blah, blah? And well, yes, they will. So, why isn't the outcome the student will be able to create a blah, blah, blah? And it's amazing how many sort of say, oh, okay. So I feel like there's a culture of safety, or even a culture of believing that's the way we have to state things, understand, demonstrate. And there's a nervousness around shifting to bolder verbs that quite explicitly describe exactly what that capability will be. And if they answer, well, no, they won't be creating an X, Y, and Z, but they will just understand X, Y, and Z, then we ask the question, well, really, are you doing them a favour in sending them out into the industry, knowing what's needed to do that, but never having actually done it? And so there's a wholesale, oh, my lights have gone out. Hang on.
It's the electronic light switch there, Troy. Leitha's not moving around.
The motion sensor, yes.
Yeah.
Need to be a little more animated, Leitha. There you go.
I was waving my arms.
Wave your arms, Leitha.
So there's definitely this change in shifting, a shift in thinking here at ECU around what it is a student is going to be able to do at the end of their program, and therefore a shift in thinking about how they themselves describe what are those capabilities that they're putting into their courses and then their programs. And I've no doubt that's happening across Australia at other universities, helped along, of course, by the government agencies that swoop in and audit us, and to see that we are meeting these requirements. But that's where I think there's a subtle shift in the style of tasks and assessments that therefore need to accompany those outcomes, those learning outcomes. So I actually find that very exciting. That's happening at a whole institutional level here, and that's where I see the sort of promise of the future in terms of adopting a more authentic way of thinking. And like you, Ron, I sort of think that things, Troy and I had a conversation about a Coursera program on instructional design, which was exactly what you described. Read some information and do a quiz, and read some more information and do a quiz. And it was so inauthentic that it was horrifying to think that this is a program or a course aimed at helping people become designers of learning. And it's part of what's led me into the independent research project that I'm doing in the DET around how instructional design courses are being taught at universities at a master's level. There is a big divide between what instructional designers do and what the courses teach them, and the teaching is the very behaviourist, ADDIE sort of structure, while acknowledging that they won't use that in the workforce. And I sort of think, how that is so not authentic. Why are we teaching like that? And there have been people in the literature talking about that for 20, 30 years now. And one day the penny will drop there too. But there's no doubt a great irony in instructional designers being taught how to design authentic learning experiences themselves being taught in an inauthentic manner.
I just want to interject really quickly to say it's really interesting to hear you say don't use the word understand or the word demonstrate. We recently at CMU got an update to our document that helps us as we go through the curriculum revision process. And it quite literally says there, do not use the word understand in your course objectives. so yeah, I think we're getting there. It's slow, but we're getting there.
Yes, and it is moving us along, isn't it? Because the whole, learning objectives, as you know, are all based on, Bloom's taxonomy, and we've sort of, for time immemorial, had, and I find those, those taxonomies powerful to understand the stages of learning. However, when it comes to developing capability, it's all about being able to demonstrate at the end of the course or at the end of the program, basically the capacity to do what you've got. I always keep going back to things whenever I try and wrap my head around a learning design. I keep thinking about how you might teach someone who's a novice to ski. To stand on skis and to ski in the snow, because you start from a point where you don't know what you're doing. Someone will show you and they'll explain it to you, but fundamentally you've got to get on those skis. You've got to go out there and fall over 100 times, and then you start to be able to understand what that person was saying, and you put two and two together. And so I think that applies to anything you're trying to learn. It's a matter of the individual working with through the guidance of an instructor to go down a path of sequentially picking up bits and pieces that ultimately lead to the demonstration of the bigger capability, which will be, in some respects, require lots and lots of small skills. And so, Troy, that's the interesting thing about authentic learning. You can, if you want to, use a lot of conventional materials as part of the authentic learning setting, because often there's a lot of prior learning that students need to pick up. So they might need to pick up some books, they might need to pick up some interactive programs and spend a bit of time familiarising themselves with the smaller elements that form part of the bigger set of knowledge that ultimately describes the capability that you're trying to develop. So throughout the late 90s and the early 2000s, I and my colleagues had a lot of fun in the Australian sector, helping people in our vocational education sector design learning materials that moved away from page-turning electronic books to more strongly describe examples of learning samples where students learned by doing and the assessment was on a capability. And there's lots and lots and lots of examples of how that can be done. However, everybody's first impulse when asked to design for learning is to say, what is the content? And that's normally a book. And then to design the learning environment around the sequential presentation of this content and an ongoing process of assessing people's development of their understanding of the content, and that's really important, but it's not the end of it. It's part of it, but a small part. And the design of the authentic task and the structuring and the scaffolding of the students working together in many cases to build or to develop their artifact as a demonstration of their capabilities is the way we see it working. So I guess we've talked about that. Go on, Leitha.
Before you move off that, can I just add to that? You shared with me a while back the paper that you wrote from that period working with the vocational sector. And there's a section in it that I, as a learning designer, find extremely useful when I'm working with university teachers, where you have those sets of continua, which for me, getting them to see where we want them to move in terms of their thinking about designing learning in their courses and their units really helps, I guess, get the penny to drop around what we're trying to do. So, for instance, the continuum from teacher-centred through to student-centred, matching up with very highly guided through to more autonomous type tasks with one definite outcome through to tasks of many possible outcomes, and using those continua as a sort of almost illustratory tool for me to show to them and say, okay, we want sort of in the early stages, in first year or in the early stages of your course, for you to provide a lot of guidance and for them to almost practice, as it were, building up these skills. But we want to end up at the point where they're constructing the solutions themselves. There are many possible solutions, that sort of thing. It provides this clarity for many of the people that I work with in helping them to understand that they're still important, especially at the early stages where the student's level of prior experience is low and they're novices at this, and the clarity around where we're trying to move, both for them as a teacher and for the learner as well. So I actually plucked that page out of your paper, and I used that to really almost diagrammatically illustrate the journey that we're going to go on together in the redesign of their course, and in the development of the students' skills from that very, heavily guided through to very little guidance at all, and even though you wrote it for the vocational sector, it has huge applicability here in the higher education sector, and I found that a very, very useful tool.
Yes, so Leitha, it's good you bring that up because it's a useful point to dwell on. When you look at what learning is, there's a broad range of elements that you can describe. So sometimes when people are in a learning setting, all they need to know is rules. So in other words, they just have to know the rules. So I'm thinking about, we were developing some learning materials for safety on oil rigs. And we needed to, one of the things is that people on the oil rig needed to know, in the case of an emergency, what to do. And there wasn't a lot of time for thinking. It was, if there's an emergency, go outside, look for this, and do that. So that's a very low-level sort of type of learning exercise. It really is a matter of just learning some procedures. And you don't have to use your brains for any of those. You just need to know what they are, and they need to be familiar. And so what you're describing about is if you were going to develop that capability, you'd probably do that in quite a procedural fashion. You'd have to explain what the rules for safety on the oil rig are, where the different safety devices are, and what actions you need to take in the case that you hear this sound or this sound or this sound. So quite directed, quite low level, and the outcome is that you will be safe when something happens. At the very other end of the spectrum, when you're teaching people about occupational health and safety, you've got people whose task it is to design the safety procedures for oil rigs. And that's a very, very high level task. So if you're going to develop that capability, you want people who can think creatively, who understand the science behind things. And so that's not about leading people in a very guided fashion. It's about getting them to understand all the principles and then perhaps having them show you what they would design and how they would design and go through the process of applying that stuff in some meaningful fashion. So then that's, as you say, quite an autonomous type of activity to do because there's no one right answer. And I used to sort of compare the levels of learning by the different assessments you could use. So the very fundamental level of learning is when the assessment of the learning is when there's right and wrong answers. So that's I used to call that the left of the continuum on the knowledge base. What is this? How do you use this? Where does this go? So, and the students, there's only one answer that's right. The others are all potentially not right. Through a continuum where you get people to apply their knowledge in particular forms where they're not actually right or wrong, but they're using and making judgments along the way. And again, coming up with answers that you could pretty much know what's coming. But at the other end, where there's that sort of design process, there's no wrong or right answer. There's some very, very good ones, and there's not so good ones. And so that to me is something that you have to contend with when you are a designer. Is the type of learning that you're trying to achieve, and what might be the best experience students have to be able to develop that capability. So, Troy, did you want to make any comment, or should we keep going?
Well, yeah, I wanted to pick up really quickly. One thing that you had said a few moments ago, Ron, was about, Bloom's taxonomy being powerful and useful still, but shifting away from just seeing this as the way they interact with content into a way that they actually do things. Like, how can we help instructors see that, creating and evaluating and judging and critiquing, like doing those types of things is more than just writing a paper or taking a test. And I think that's really important. And then also, I think, Leitha, you picked up on something about the clarity, saying that their role as an instructor is still important. I mean, we've been hearing, Vygotsky and Dewey and, move from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side for 100 years, but it's been really hard to get that to move. And when you just said that, that was really important for me, is like thinking about how do we honor that person that is still at the front of the room and maybe get them to go to the side of the room or the back of the room or in a small group or, some other configuration where they're elevating the voices of students, but help them see that they are important to that whole learning experience. It's not that you're being replaced, it's that you're irreplaceable, and we need to think about what it is that you're doing and how you're doing it so you can be more effective. I think that's really important. And yeah, I guess that my closing ideas here are to hear from you. What's next? Where do we go? What do you see on the horizon? How are we changing the conversation around instructional design? How are we moving people forward as they're thinking about these types of authentic e-learning experiences? Do you see unique examples of this that we could look toward? What are your thoughts heading into the future?
Yeah, well, it's a good point. When you sort of work with the notion of authentic learning, some people can embrace it really, really wholeheartedly as teachers, but fundamentally miss the whole thing entirely. I remember, at stages during my career, I was developing an online course that was teaching instructional designers. And so I set up some authentic tasks that I wanted people to do. And a couple of students in my class did the task instantly. So what was my culminating, experience at the end of the course, which was meant to be a complex, broad, open, task that had lots of elements. They just sat down and did it off the seat of their pants. They didn't do very much reading. They didn't do very much collaboration. They didn't get very many multiple perspectives. They just sort of did what it is and then presented the task to me. And I thought, we've got a problem here, because whilst the artifact is the element that you're going to judge their capability from, you've got to, as a teacher, make sure that they don't start heading off entirely the wrong direction when they start and send themselves on a road to failure. So in authentic learning, the journey of the learning experience is very, very important. And so that's where the teacher comes in. The teacher needs to sort of in some way choreograph the learning experience and to make sure that the student is having all the right learning experiences and understands exactly what they need to be doing to be arriving at this artifact that you need. Because you can very easily give them an authentic task and they will do it without any learning whatsoever. And then you've got a problem, because you've got this product that in some respects might be quite good, but it failed to provide the learning experience that you were seeking to provide. So you've missed the whole opportunity. So that's something that dwells with me when I think about how we can develop people's capabilities. So going forward, I think what we need to do is we need to make sure that people who are in teaching settings are able to understand the importance of learner engagement. In other words, they need to know about how to get learners interested in what they're doing. It's lots and lots of learners at university don't really want to learn anything. They want to pass the exam, or they want to pass the test, and so their sole what drives them is what the assessment will be. So while the assessment assesses low level or assesses knowledge or assesses understanding, you're going to forever find yourself in settings where the authenticity of the task is going to be difficult to generate. So I think that as we go ahead, what we should be doing is focusing quite considerably on assessment and how we can make sure that we have authentic assessments in our courses and programs, and the authentic assessment then compels in some respects the way we are teaching to sort of match and reflect that. So that's a good strategy. And we need to, and I guess because we're in this world now of course learning outcomes, we've got a setting where there's a context that makes being able to demonstrate capabilities something that people understand and something that people know that they need to be doing. So it sort of brings both together, I suspect. So happy to get any other comments that people might have there.
If I can, what's swirling around in my head is a number of things that are coming from the point of view of currently being a learner myself in the DET program, but also being somebody whose professional role is trying to help other teachers themselves design learning. A number of things seem to be all coming together. learner, how for me the future lies in getting our learners engaged, and there's those words around purpose and relevance and authenticity, motivation to learn, being motivated more by the engaging process than by the the pass or the fail or the achieving a grade, and how all that comes together for me as both a learner and a learning designer is kind of exemplified in the two courses that we're doing this semester, yours and Ray Francis's. Ron Troy's course is blended and online learning, and Ray's is around evolving internet learning. And in Ray's course, we are currently being required to have regular group chats, and we're in groups of 4. And how I'm trying to bring this together in my mind is that in Troy's course this semester, we're being asked to review a course, the design of a course, and then we're being asked to redesign a course ourselves. And for me, those are the two most engaging parts of Troy's course, because of the authenticity in relation to my own role. Having a go at reviewing a course and making judgments from my point of view about what's right and what's wrong about a course, what's working well and what's not, and then having a go, which I do all the time anyway, but having a go at designing a course myself. That's very motivating. In Ray's course, during the last group chat that we have, my fellow students and I were discussing, what is effective teaching practice, in an online setting. And it came up within our, I think it was Heather who said, wouldn't it be great if we were asked to design an educational technology ourselves? What would you come up with and consider as an effective educational technology? And we were all having a bit of a laugh and saying, that would be so cool. And Ray, if you're listening, we should be designing an educational technology ourselves. And listening to the enthusiasm in everyone's voices around that idea, it tapped in for me to that idea of, sounds like we would all be quite engaged by that idea of having a go at designing an educational technology. So that's where it all lies for me, tapping into the motivation to learn rather than the motivation to achieve a grade. And the key to doing that is through being engaged in authentic tasks that have purpose and relevance to us as learners and as future professionals. And in a way, I kind of think it seems so obvious. Why isn't it happening more? But it is a big leap. Yeah, it is a big leap for a lot of teachers. And possibly, the key lies in emphasising the continuing role that they have in that process. And for me, this is why MOOCs are not succeeding in the way that they should around providing capabilities rather than grasp of content, because they don't have that person there, that vital teacher who provides the feedback. We may be engaging in this journey, we may be constructing our own meaning as learners, but we still need that feedback coming in, that reassurance we're on the right track, or that we're doing well. And that's where the key lies for me, I think. I'm not sure how succinctly I'll put that, but that's what it all comes down to me, tapping into the motivation to learn and having somebody to spur us on along the way and keep that motivation alive through the tasks that they're helping us to engage in.
Yeah, that's probably well said, Leitha, because you're right. There's wealth of resources out there for students to use as part of their learning experience. But what we need to be doing is designing for the students the learning experience that gets them to use that information and to develop a capability for a performance based on it. So, yeah, so all of those MOOCs are wonderful things as part and parcel of the process of learning. And I keep thinking back that all throughout my teaching career, I used to draw 3 little circles to help people understand instructional design. One said resources. So for an effective learning environment, you need resources. For an effective learning environment, you needed tasks, and you needed supports. So the tasks were the learning activities that you set the students. The resources were where they got the information to help them do them, and then the support was how you as a teacher provided them with the help that they needed to know which way to go and how to go, and to inspire them to get going. So all of those are important, and it's a matter of getting the right blend and making sure you've got every one of those filled.
I appreciate you sharing that here at the end. Resources, tasks, and supports, and to hear from you, Leitha, to know that you feel the tasks in the TET program are authentic and engaging is heartwarming and intellectually good to know. I'm glad that you're feeling that things
some of them, and you know what, I think the key to improving continuously is looking at which ones did turn out to be motivating, and which ones fell a bit flat, and were they was it perhaps because they didn't have that authentic motivating element.
Yep. Exactly.
It might be useful to have a look at the resources around what Ron just described. I think it's called the learning design. What was it called, Ron? The learning design model, is it? That has the triangle, the square and the circle, the resources, the support, the tasks. Yeah. A nice, simple way of thinking about the design of learning, but at a deeper complexity involved in those 3 elements: the resources, the supports, and the tasks.
Right. Well, thank you both for taking the time to think through this kind of past, present, and future of authentic e-learning, and for sharing your experiences as learning designers, and especially for bringing an Australian perspective to it as compared to the American perspective that I have. It's always good to hear what's going on in the kind of broader educational fields from international perspectives, which I greatly appreciate. So thank you both, and I hope that you have a good evening as I'm getting started with the rest of my morning here.
No, it's my pleasure, Troy, and thanks, Leitha, for your help. So you have a good day, Troy.